They called it a championship lead because the numbers fit on a screen. They called it dominance because the table looked clean. They called it early control because most people in this sport music still confuse clean conditions with superior men. That is the first lie of 2026. Marco Bezzecchi did not build an untouchable title lead in the first 3 rounds. He inherited the softest opening runway any frontrunner could ask for. While Marc Marquez paid for this season in bent machinery, interrupted rhythm and punishment disguised as race management, the music gap is real. The conditions behind it are the wound, and the wound is not Bezzecchi's points music lead. It is the fact that MotoGP has already started judging survival like it was underperformance. OD on the floor immediately. Bezzecchi got what every rider dreams of and almost nobody gets for free in modern MotoGP. A clean weekend, a clean launch, clear air and a music motorcycle balanced enough to let him ride forward instead of repair. He took the race by the throat because nothing underneath him was fighting back. Marquez got the same weekend on paper and a completely different war underneath the fairing. Sprint discomfort, main race mechanical damage, a rim issue in the middle of the Grand Prix that changed the relationship between rider and motorcycle. While the points kept counting anyway, the standings recorded 12 for one man and music 5 for the other. The championship table moved on. The damage did not. That is the first cost this season forced into public. Marquez lost points for music, a problem talent cannot override once metal stops cooperating. And that is where T's cheating, because once the numbers music land, the paddock treats every loss equally. 5 points is 5 points. A gap is a gap. A rider behind is a rider behind. Convenient, cowardly too. A bent rim is not a riding mistake, it is not a music pace deficit, it is not proof another man has been figured out. It is a mechanical theft music that steals 20 points and leaves the victim looking guilty on the table. Bezzecchi left Thailand looking like the chosen man of the new era. Marquez left it wearing the cost of equipment failure like it was a weakness in his own hands. That is how false narratives start in this sport. Not with lies screamed loudly, with context quietly removed. Brazil made the cut deeper because it ex machinery. It showed how fast this championship can become political. The moment Marquez is close enough to matter, he wins the sprint cleanly, publicly under pressure. That alone should have forced the conversation back toward danger. A broken champion does not win sprints in a field this dense. A finished rider does not remind the grid in one clean burst that the old violence is still there, waiting for a stable Sunday. But the Grand Prix turned into a cage. Francesco D'Antonio in front, Marquez behind. Same Ducati ecosystem, same VR46 orbit, same old tension hanging over every lap. Marc spins near anything touched by Valentino Rossi's empire. Was there a signed order? No. MotoGP rarely needs paper when loyalty already knows its route. Don Antonio did not have to beat Marquez outright to wound him. He only had to delay him long enough. He did. Bezzecchi disappeared up the road. The championship gap expanded. Another theft arrived wearing legal clothes. That is the part polite coverage keeps refusing to touch. That just because nobody confessed on camera. MotoGP is a pressure sport built on implications, garage alignments, and the silent understanding of who serves what power when the crucial laps arrive. If DJ Antonio's ride in Brazil was only about his own result, then it was a strangely selfless performance from a man with no realistic title control to protect. But if his job, spoken or unspoken, was to make Marquez's Sunday harder, then the wound gets clearer. Marc was not only racing competitors, he was racing a grid already willing to make his recovery expensive. That cost does not show beside his name in the standings either. It still bleeds. Austin turned the knife because should have been a rescue music point. Marquez at TD to be the reminder, the correction, the place where the sport remembers who it is dealing with when the corners start coming fast and the front tire begins asking dangerous questions. Instead, Coda became another bill. Contact with DJ Antonio again, a long lap penalty. A forced surrender of time in the middle of a race where he already had too much to recover. He served it and still came home fifth. Fifth with a sanction hanging off his race, fifth, while the season kept demanding repair work instead of control. And what did the public do with it? They called it recklessness. They called it old Marquez chaos. They called it evidence that Bezzecchi's lead meant superiority. No, it meant one rider had been allowed to race 3 rounds in order while another had to survive 3 rounds in fragments. That is not a title test. That is triage being scored as if it were equal combat. So the wound is now visible if you stop staring at the table long enough to read the blood properly. Aurelia has been real. None of that is fiction. But a lead built in clean air against a rival losing points to damage, interference and penalties is not proof of ownership. It is proof the storm has only hit one side of the paddock so far. The table says Marquez is 36 points down. The real season says he has not had 3 clean Sundays to defend himself yet. And when a championship starts convicting a rider before conditions even turn equal, somebody is being crowned too early. This was always heading here because the first 3 rounds were not built on equal pressure, equal freedom, or equal technical truth. They were built on a mechanism, not a mystery. A mechanism. Aurelia arrived with a motorcycle stable enough to let Marco Bezzecchi music ride the race he wanted. Ducati arrived with Marc Marquez carrying the burden of solving the race while racing it. That is the split. That is the machinery under the headline. One rider has been allowed to express the bike. The other has been forced to negotiate with it corner by corner, lap by lap. While the championship table pretends both jobs were the same, they were not, and because they were not, the early lead was never neutral. It was manufactured by structure before talent music even got its full vote. Ducati did not enter 2026 from a position of technical certainty. It entered music from denial. Marquez was managing a bike that is not giving him what he needs, then dealing with a rim issue, then absorbing race-shaping penalties, then being forced into recovery instead of control. That is not a rider underperforming his package. That is a music writer being asked to produce clean outcomes from unstable inputs. The mechanism is ugly because it is simple. When the bike does not give front-end trust, rhythm breaks. When rhythm breaks, aggression becomes risky. When aggression becomes risky, every move looks like a character flaw instead of the mechanical compromise that created it. That is how a factory protects the machine and exposes the rider in the same motion. Aurelia, meanwhile, Oat's mechanism has been the opposite. The RSGP is not only fast, it is cooperative. That matters more than peak speed when a season is young and pressure is still deciding where to settle. Bezzecchi has been able to qualify clean, start clean, and run in clean air because the machine has not forced him into improvisation. He deserves credit for converting that advantage. He also pays the price of truth here. He has not yet had to win from disorder. He has not yet had to carry a damaged Sunday. He has not yet had a race where politics, penalties, and mechanical instability all arrive in the same weekend and ask who he is without clean control. That is not an insult. It is the exact test he has not faced. A lead earned before that test is a lead built on protected conditions. Then comes the second layer of the mecha art prefers to keep wrapped in just racing ecosystem power. Brazil and Austin did not only hurt Marquez because of pace interruptions, they hurt because the Ducati network around him is not emotionally neutral territory. Francesco Di Gian Antonio as more than a random opponent. Same umbrella, same data culture, same VR46 orbit, same old Rossi Marquez fault line sitting in the garage air whether anyone says it out loud or not. In that environment, Marquez does not need formal team orders against him for the mechanism to work. He only needs one satellite rider to make his afternoon costly. Delay him, crowd him, break his timing music, let the leader breathe. That is enough. The paddock can call it hard racing. GP24 calls it what it is, a structure where one rider's path music keeps getting made expensive by loyalties nobody wants to name on television. And once music, that structure exists, the interpretation machine becomes Bezzecchi stronger instead of Marquez robbed by damage. Brazil becomes Marquez could not go with the leader instead of Marquez contained long enough for the race to split. Music Austin becomes Marc reckless again instead of Marc penalized and still recovering stronger than most of the field. Once the machine underneath Marc became unstable and the grid around him became politically inconvenient, the early standings were always going to lie by omission. Not because numbers are false, because numbers do not confess how they were made. There is another cut hidden inside the same structure. Aprilia's rise as being solely mechanism is far less romantic and far more dangerous. Bezzecchi arrived carrying years of Ducati setup memory, Ducati cornering habits, Ducati race reading DNA. Aurelia's technical acceleration did not arrive from nowhere. It sharpened as Ducati-bred intelligence entered the building through riders and personnel. So now Ducati faces the most humiliating version of competition possible. Not an alien rival inventing a new future, but a rival weaponizing pieces of Ducati's own past against them. That makes Bezzecchi's current comfort even more conditional. He's not leading a clean revolution. Music, he's leading the first phase of a borrowed knowledge assault against a factory still pretending its own internal warnings were optional. So by this music point, the mechanism should be impossible to miss. Ducati gave Marquez a season opening in Vire required repair work. Aurelia gave Bezzecchi one where execution could stay pure. The grid around Marc amplified the cost. The interpretation around Bezzecchi protected the glow. And because the sport loves early certainty, 3 rounds became enough for people to confuse structural advantage with permanent hierarchy. That is the trap, not that Bezzecchi is fake, not that Marquez is music blameless. The trap is that everyone is treating unequal conditions like they already delivered a final verdict. They have not. They have only revealed who got to begin this war on level ground music, and who has been climbing out of the hole while the cameras call it a pace issue. The cost of that lie is still growing. The verdict is already harder than the standings admit. Marco Baschi is leading a championship that has not music, asked him the only question that matters, while Marc Marquez is being judged inside a season that has attacked him before it has tested music, his rival. That is the power shift. Not Aurelia over Ducati in some permanent changing of the guard fairy tale. Not Bezzecchi over Marquez in any final sporting sense. The real shift is uglier. Aurelia currently holds clean control. Ducati holds doubt. Bezzecchi rides with oxygen. Marquez rides with interruption. And when one man is allowed to govern races while the other is forced to survive events, the table stops measuring superiority and starts recording who got the cleaner route through the minefield. Power in MotoGP is never just speed. It is conditions. It is sequence. It is who gets to race the motorcycle and who gets trapped explaining it. Right now, Bezzecchi has control of narrative, control of track position, and control of public belief. Aurelia gets to wear momentum like proof of destiny. Ducati gets dragged into every weekend answering whether Marc is overpushing, whether the bike is nervous, whether the penalties say something ugly about the rider rather than the circumstances forcing the move. That is already a transfer of leverage. When one garage spends Sunday defending results and the other spends Sunday explaining why its champion had to recover from another interruption, power has moved before the titles say it has. The paddock can smell it. That is why the noise got loud so early. But here's the better shift. Aprilia's current authority is being celebrated like an independent uprising. Bezzecchi is Ducati bred. The race understanding he carries did not fall from the sky over Noli. The technical acceleration behind Aurelia's rise tracks back to people and methods that learned how to win under Bologna's roof, then carried that knowledge elsewhere. So Ducati's punishment is not merely losing. It is losing against a machine sharpened by fragments of its own intelligence while still refusing to admit the original fracture inside its present bike. That is humiliation at factory level. They are not being overthrown by strangers. They are being outmaneuvered by what they taught the wrong people and ignored in the right garage. Marc pays the most immediate price because forced to absorb all of it. Thailand stole points through machinery. Brazil made progress expensive through race dynamics. The cameras could call innocent. Austin added a long lap penalty and still failed to break him out of the top 5. That chain matters. Damage, containment, music, penalty, recovery, repeat. A weaker rider drowns inside that sequence. Marquez is still standing in it. Which is exactly why the officials tried to recast survival as evidence of decline. If they called it honestly, they would have to admit the championship's 5th-place rider has spent 3 rounds fighting variables the music leader has not yet seen in one uninterrupted wave. That admission would poison the fairy tale immediately. So the sport does what it always does when truth threatens music comfort. It praises the clean winner and psychologizes the man doing repair work in public. Bezzecchi does not escape clean music either. He has been fast. He has also not yet been convicted by pressure. No healthy Marquez in sustained clean air pursuit. No mechanical collapse under him while the title math bleeds live. No politically loaded race where every overtake carries ecosystem consequences. No 3-race sequence where the bike stops cooperating and the narrative stops protecting. Until that arrives, his lead remains a protected lead. Strong, yes. Sacred, no. And if that sounds unfair, good. Championship leaders are supposed to earn the right to be feared, not borrow it from a calm opening month and a rival's damaged Sundays. The sport rushed to crown him because humans adore early certainty. MotoGP usually punishes that stupidity later. The locked music consequence is now plain. If Ducati finds one front-end correction, one blee mechanical baseline that lets Marquez stop negotiating and start dictating. This championship stops looking like a procession and starts looking like an indictment of everyone who crowned Bezzecchi in April. Because the current gap was built before equal weather ever arrived. X happened. Bezzecchi got 3 comparatively clean race environments. X makes Y inevitable. The standings inflated confidence around his control and music, doubt around Marquez's condition. Y makes Z irreversible by the next pressure phase. When the conditions turn messy for Aurelia, he will be judged against a myth of invincibility he has not yet earned. While Marquez, already hardened by damage and interruption, will meet chaos as an old profession. That is not speculation. That is how sequence punishes false conclusions in this sport. So ask the one question the paddock does not music want printed with names attached. If Bezzecchi's lead was added to survive the kind of weekends Marquez has already bled through. Are we watching the birth of a champion, or just the most flattering illusion a clean opening month could manufacture for a rider who still has not seen the storm? GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP, we cover its war. Music, music. Rewrite IT a new way DONT make it short DONT skip any word.